Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just going to do a lesson on the Hebrew Israelites and just want to talk a little bit about their theology and what I've learned about them. I'm going to lump them together as a movement. There are quite a few different groups, and I'm certain there are a few at least out there who I would not need to make a video towards, like I'm doing here, but. I know, for example, Yasharal in Milwaukee, they believe in, the kind of things that I would teach on my channel. They're one of the few that I would say, are flat earthers, virgin birthers, Jesus is dark skin, America's Mystery Babylon, and all that kind of stuff, and the Mark of the Beast. So there are some out there that I think that, are above this kind of criticism, but just for sake of education, and if people come across them, it looks like they're going to be in the news a little bit more, because apparently this shooting that happened recently, I think it was in Jersey City, was linked to the quote Black Hebrew Israelites, and it looks like God is doing this, and that's what I want to sort of talk about, how to debunk their theology if somebody ever comes across them, or just again for just using logic and the scriptures, how to understand the mind of God, just better, and using them as an example. So I would say the two most powerful verses that I've come across that explain the condition of the so-called Negroes in America is Deuteronomy 28:68. They quote this a lot, as they should. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. So where they are, in that part of the world, you would not need ships to get to Egypt. The land of Egypt, as we know now, this has to be a different place. And for anybody out there who knows a little bit about the Bible and the book of Revelation and, Exodus, Egypt is described as a place of bondage and slavery, and also described as Sodom, spiritually Sodom. And so it's America. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, that thou shalt see it no more again, and ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, can be interpreted as no man will rescue you. And so it will require God. And I believe we're living in those days where that rescuing is going to happen. But this is a very, very powerful verse, and to me fits perfectly. If you read more of Deuteronomy, the whole chapter, the curses are laid out, and they are exactly consistent with the narrative of how the so-called Negroes got to America. And so that one is important. And then also 2 Ezra 6:18-20 reads, it said, the days are coming when I draw near to visit the inhabitants of the earth. I feel like this is happening right now. And when I require from the doers of iniquity the penalty of their iniquity, and when the humiliation of Zion is complete. So there are two things happening simultaneously. God is judging, the doers of iniquity with a penalty for iniquity, and he's also using that iniquity to humiliate Zion, which is another term for Israelites. When the seal is placed upon them, the age that is about to pass away, then I will show these signs. The book shall be opened before the face of the firmament, and all shall see my judgment together. So all these things, there's a confluence of events. They're contemporaneous, they're happening at the same time. And so God is able to perform an incredible optimization. He's doing a lot of things. He's a multi-threaded CPU, to say the least. I say that respectfully. It's incredible. But so we have this group, which I believe, some of them rightly state that they are the biblical Jews, which would make them Israelites. But there are some problems with their thinking, and I've tried to bring this up to them throughout my interaction with them. And it's just common sense to me. And I just state this more for pedagogical reasons, just to sort of think it out, and what God will, I suspect in the very least, interact with them, how they couldn't have figured this out. I believe many of them are actors, so I'm just speaking from an earthly context, but these are things that people should think about, in the times that we live in, especially again, because we have the luxury of having most of the Bible be in the past. And obviously a great deal of it speaks towards the future, and I believe we're living in that future, but we have a huge advantage of understanding, God's plans, the many of them, at least to some degree, because we have this vantage point and that kind of thing. So, these are things that we all will need to know, and God would expect us to be able to think these things through and understand. And so the first thing that there's a problem with their whole vibration is if you ever hear a lot of them on the streets, they're going to be yelling, at the quote other nations. And then they have a list of people, different parts of the world that they believe represent the 12 tribes, groups who have come over to this side of the world, again, on cargo slave ships, like in Deuteronomy 28:68. So they would then associate those people as being Israelites. And fair enough, that that part's fine, I guess. But you will notice that they will yell at other people who they do not agree with them, and then call them another nation and then start making fun of them. The major problem with that is that it lacks understanding of God. It lacks an understanding of the very verses that they're using to support their condition of why they're on this side of flat earth and what brought them here. And it just shows that they don't understand it. As much as they're using it to defend that they are the quote unquote Israelites, God's chosen people, they should understand that God did that. So if you read all of Deuteronomy 28, it lays out blessings for God's children if they follow the law, and then it lays out curses for the result of not following the law. And then this would be one of the judgments, is going into slavery. And so God has set this as a judgment for them. So there's no one else to blame but potentially themselves, and then God deciding that was the appropriate punishment for their transgression as a nation. And so that's a big problem, and it's just, again, everything about the world right now, even amongst the quote unquote chosen people, God is taken out of the equation. It's all man. It's just man against woman. Everybody's bickering. It's just nonsense. It's just noise. And these are the quote unquote chosen people. So this, again, to me, is proof that we're in the end times, because really no one cares about God. Like no one. I'm talking even people who claim to be the most coupled to him through this lineage. They don't also get God involved in the conversation. So that's the first ding, is that anybody who claims that they are here as a product of Deuteronomy 28:68 and is not upset at themselves or God who gave them that judgment is just out of their mind. Like it's the exact analogy is God is the judge, the Hebrews would be the defendant, and then the bailiff would be the quote other nations that came and took them and exercised the punishment that the judge decided. And so why would they get mad at the bailiff? Let's say it's potentially us. We're non-Israelites. Why would they get mad at us? Blame God or blame yourself for making those mistakes. And then they can't escape this reality because they also, the defense that people use when they come up to them is like, oh, it wasn't me, it was my forefathers that did that. I didn't put you guys in slavery, which, any logical person would use that as an argument. They bring out multiple verses that say, well, it's God deals with generations, and like he will exercise his judgment to like the children, for their forefathers' iniquity. And fair enough, okay, good. And then but the problem with that is that those people who came over here on cargo slave ships, they're living a result of their forefathers' iniquity because God would still operate that way on the left and the right hand side. And so those verses actually destroy their own rationale for getting on other people. They should then accept that because that is the reason why that they're in that state. And then furthermore, on top of that, they teach reincarnation. So they actually believe that they were people in those prior generations. So they're actually potentially living out their own punishment. And so it's just, there's no reason to complain, just suck it up. That's what their own theology is telling them that they should understand, and introspect, like, hey, we're here because of our own iniquity. And then this is God's judgment. And even if we weren't those people in those, off the west coast of Africa, we're paying for their sins, because the Bible says that, the iniquity of a forefather will be taken out on future generations. So we just got to suck it up. But then they also, some of them, especially like the people, quote, high up, they actually have the audacity to say that they are some of those leaders in the past. So they are then living out their own iniquity. And so they also shouldn't complain, because it's just God's righteous judgment passed down from generation to generation. And so they're sleeping in the bed that they made. So they have so many contradictions just from their narrative, just at this like superficial level, and this is not, you don't even have to be really a Bible person to point this out. And I tell them, why aren't you guys angry at God? Why don't you guys man up? You guys are supposed to be the quote unquote chosen people, but all you're doing is bickering, yelling at everybody, trying to get their sympathy, like, like everybody put me in slavery and all this kind of stuff. God put you in slavery and he did it based on certain things that you did or didn't do. So go complain to him. And so they literally look like madmen, and madwomen. And I would say it looks like, from what's happening in the news, which motivated me to do this lesson, is that God's going to embarrass them more because now he's going to put in the news, link, that movement to fake shootings. And then he's going to now cause more and more tension between them and the other nations. And then there's going to be like infighting, and I suspect that everything that they prophesy, all the drama that they want, God's just getting it ready he's just putting it over their head. Like I read in 2 Ezra 6:19, God's humiliating them because they're not thinking. And so all I can do with people, whoever come by my channel, is if we're dumb, and we are naive, God will humiliate us. And it's open season with God. He doesn't discriminate, if like we think stupid things and don't use common sense and ultimately don't approach him for settling our debts with him first, then he's just going to let everybody else, deal with us. He's like, all right, I was like, you don't want to come to me and address, with a humble heart, the things that you've done or the things that you have done as a nation or any of that kind of stuff. You just want to go and hoot and holler at everybody else. Okay, go. I'll put my judgment with them, and then you're going to interact with them and deal with it, and they'll deal with you. And so this is what God does, and it's just obvious from these verses, and I could find many, many more from not just 2 Ezra, but everywhere that God does that. And so, and that makes sense. And God even does it generationally. And there's many verses that prove that as well, that, we could potentially be paying for mistakes that, people in our lineage made. And so there's also support for that. So that's a major problem, with the Hebrew Israelites. And then so another problem with just that narrative of Deuteronomy 28:68 is the Bible says that it is better to literally cut your arm off. If this arm required me to sin, Jesus says just cut it off, because it's better to have not have an arm than to not enter the kingdom. Of course, he's being not excessively parabolic. He's telling us that's how much God cares about sin and hates it. So that's the amount that people closest to him, to God, the chosen people who the law was given to, the Israelites, would care about obeying the law. And so this level is why God did Deuteronomy 28:68, because he was blessing them, giving them the law, giving them, insight into him, and they rejected them. They rejected him. And so now, if we have a group of people who, let's just say I'm part of a group of people who are being plucked off the west coast of Africa and being, put on a ship like sardines, packed like sardines, and clearly not by nice people, and we're supposed to be the chosen people, how on earth is it righteous to go ahead with that? And this is just the journey, which was crazy. I'm sure it's much, much worse than anything that could be portrayed in a movie. Now we have groups of, again, these are the quote unquote chosen people. God is packing them like sardines, sending them on this long journey. Now they're in this other place and they're being brutalized, and like gator bait, they're like sewing cats into like women's wombs and all that kind of stuff. And like they're just taking it. They're just like, hey, like whatever, I guess this is normal. Any person who would be anywhere near anything like that would just take their own life, like, and some did, thankfully. Those are the righteous people, in my opinion, who just like flip themselves over the boat. That's insane to accept that kind of treatment. That's insane, and it's not as extreme, at least for most of us in the days that we live in, but for some people they're still under, that type of bondage, but worldwide. But we're not supposed to accept that. Doesn't even matter if we're God's chosen people or not, but it's magnified if you are God's chosen people, because again, you should know God exists, and like, you naturally want to be around God, not obviously have to go through even 1/zillionth of any of that kind of treatment. And so they're proving their disconnect from God by their acceptance, of this treatment. And so that's a major ding. God's people, wherever they are very anxious to be in the Spirit. Wherever those people are, they would not even want to be here when times are good, when they're peaceful. They wouldn't want to be here, much less anything related to Deuteronomy 28:68 and the kind of life that we have for most of us right now. So that's a pretty big ding, against them. And so I know why that happened. To me, many of those people, the ones who did not kill themselves, they're just actors. And so God just programmed them. They had to go through it. And then so now they've created an environment for, I believe, this final generation. And then if you can accept reincarnation, spirits are now infused into bodies, and then we're all sleeping in the bed that we made. And so and people go in different beds depending on what happened in the past. And so it's all God's plan, but I want for us to sort of be equipped to debate with them, is like, well, if you guys are so spiritual and you guys claim to love the law and all that kind of stuff, Jesus says that if anything around you requires you to sin, it's better just to cut your arm off than to use your arm to sin. When, being under the subjection of completely wicked, demonic people would require a person to like not even know God exists, and like not learn anything and just have to just be around a bunch of degenerates and stuff like that. Like the amount of sins that they were forced to commit are just like infinite. And so a person would have to then, if they were truly connected to God in any meaningful way, they would just take their life, and so that should be obvious. And Jesus did that. Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of that, because he was given everything. He was offered the whole world, everything from Satan, and he didn't compromise, and he could have preserved his life here on earth and sort of finagled away, politicked his way into something else. But he committed like a voluntary suicide. And so, he is the ultimate example. Of course, we can't live up to his standard perfectly, but there are times where they come across like, they just got their arm around Jesus like buddy. They call him their big bro and all this kind of nonsense. These people don't even know the basics. And so like their very theology can be used against them with just like a high school understanding, of like logic and common sense. So they fail there, and so that's at the sort of foundational level of their narrative. We need to remind them they need to get angry at God. Don't get mad at us. It's like, we didn't make ourselves, we didn't make the law, we didn't make you guys break the law and all this. And the irony now is that, and this is the part of the humiliation, we're telling them that they're the Jews. They don't even know that they're the Jews, and then they don't care about the law. I have not met anybody, interact with anybody who takes the law seriously in this day. And I'm talking anybody, nobody. If there is somebody out there, I hope that there is. I hope that there's some tribe somewhere that God could look down and be like, okay, like not want to vomit like he does here, most Americans. Hopefully there are people out there, fingers crossed. But I'm telling them they don't care about the law. Like, and I'm a quote Elamite according to them. And so like this whole world, like with the Bible being true, is just a complete joke. If the Bible is not true, it also sort of explains why the world is the way it is, because just there's no narrative for it. It's just random. So in a way, it's somewhat comforting that at least the Bible is not the sort of sole cause of all this kind of stuff. But if the Bible is true, this entire world is just a complete joke because of the people who actually read the Bible. And these are, again, people who believe that they're the chosen people. And so the way I reconcile this stupidity is that they certainly are the Jews, and we are in the end times, but God's eye is set on the poor. The so-called Negroes, the poor really everywhere worldwide, but it's the poor that are like literally just down the street, from me. It's not these clowns that are hooting and hollering, and they're ball earthers, a lot of them, and they're just out of their mind. And a lot of them are non-virgin birthers, which is just blasphemous to the Holy Spirit, which again makes sense why they're just not thinking. Like they're just parts of their brain that are just completely blocked from just this common sense that I just shared here, that they should be directing their attention towards God, to be angry, about the condition that they're in. If they're angry, they feel like it's, undeserved or whatever. But they should know that it's deserved. Again, they're the people that are pushing, reincarnation and, put the judgment of the forefathers on the children and all those different verses. They're the first people to bring those out. Fair enough, bring them out, but you have to think that God's applying those to everybody. He's not just giving people a random pass, and like that kind of thing. So he's going to punish people, fundamentally. And so the left-hand side just gets punished at the end, in sort of one foul swoop, like I read here in 2nd Ezra. So they're not getting away with it either. And one would have to think that there is a way that this is also working on the left-hand side. But, Satan, I'm assuming his priorities are flipped. And people who are sort of more wicked and deceptive in the past will actually get a better, quote, better position in future generations. But God does not allow that to keep happening forever. Like that will stop. And like it says here, I will require from the doers of iniquity the penalty of their iniquity. So we would have to believe that those who did, quote, more evil in the past and are, quote, getting away with it now, they will undergo a proportionate amount of discomfort and judgment, from God. And so, but that part is like, we don't, obviously, I don't know how the mechanics of that exactly work, but it's very clear that there's, generational repercussions for sin. And the Hebrews have brought that out. And so like they have to, drink from that well as well. And so it's not like they're getting some different God with a different mindset. So, to me, it's like, it's tragic, like it's just really everybody reading the Bible is reading it and just like their brain is not functioning, like they're just not utilizing common sense. And I've realized more and more what it really is that everything going on in this world does not involve God. Everything. If somebody has an example, bring it to me and share it. Nothing in this world involves God. Nothing. The Hebrews don't. Christianity definitely doesn't. Islam, Buddhism, everything. Our governments, of course not. Flat earthers, majority, no. No one is involving God in anything. And this has to be by design. And so the only thing that I could sort of make sense of this is that it's for a very, very few people who do involve God, and a lot of them have to be poor, because then they're the only people that are not, just manipulating and truncating the Bible message and just turning their brain off. And so like just not thinking, clearly really at all, and not involving God, which is completely satanic, especially if you claim to be the chosen people. It makes absolutely no sense. And so, that whole narrative, I keep telling them, like, why aren't you guys angry at God? Why aren't you directing your anger? If God is humiliating you, like it says here in Ezra, and obvious that he would be doing this, why aren't you angry at him? Like God is the one who decided how much the humiliation will be. The method of, transport from west coast of Africa to here, God decided that, pack people in like sardines and all that. This was not Satan's idea. God decided that. The bailiff doesn't come and decide the punishment when they come and take you away in a courtroom. That's the judge does. And so God is the judge. So you can't get mad at us or other quote unquote other nations. This is part of the humiliation. We are teaching them about themselves, because a majority of them don't even know that they're Jews, and they're ball earthers. So God is humiliating them on like so many different levels. He's not done laughing at them. He's like, really? Like, you guys still haven't decided to turn to him with a humble heart. Instead, they're still like hooting and hollering on the street, getting mad at everybody else, and the government hates me, and I'm just I can't run a business. They're shooting us in the streets and all that kind of stuff. Even after all of this, they still don't turn to God, with a humble heart. And so God's like, there you go, go for it then. If you just want to keep going and fight with them and blame all these other people and all that, go for it. I'll give you a bunch of ball earth leaders, so you guys don't have to really talk about God, talk about the Most High. Go for it. And so this is part of the humiliation. I have a feeling that it's not that much more left, but this is the humiliation. And so we have to also think that and know that this is the way God works, with us too, with anybody, and it would make sense. Like, if we are teaching certain things, and it's a warning really to all of us, like, if we do things and operate in a way that are just obvious, like for just using common sense and having even just a relatively superficial amount of humility, and we don't exercise that, don't have that and then exercise that, God is excited to humiliate us. We would have to think that would be the case. Like, and it would be bad if he didn't, because then we would just continue on doing nonsense, and just thinking like stupid things. And so it looks like some of them are just programmed to like just be actors, and just continue teaching nonsense. But for those like individuals on the quote lower levels, like, be aware of this, like very much that this is happening, and God is doing this. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.